Well, tonight we are in awe of old Tom's golfing achievements, but I'm going to try to add a little to the whole story as a greenkeeper, which after all was his day job. And the famous mantra, the famous little quip about him is mair, saund. As the full quote is, if you can see it at the bottom, is pit on mair, saund, honeyman. Honeyman was his put upon assistant, and history's been a wee bit hard on Honeyman because he was a scratch golfer, and I think we can insert that at this point, that he was a good golfer and a greenkeeper. Let's go back to the beginning, however, and this is where Tom was born, in North Street, 1821, North Street. Those two pedestrians on the far side are just about where the house is and was. And we have to remark that that was a great place for, if you're going to be Open champion, because there were two other Open champions from the area, Ochterlony and Herd, played as kids in the street using hickory, no, not hickory, using thorn shinty sticks. And for balls, they raided the bins behind the R&A for champagne corks, which they trimmed down and used that up and down. And as I say, 3 Open champions produced from North Street. This is as it is at the moment. The cinema, as you know, is disappearing, and the house of his birth is on the left. And there's a great mood on at the moment to honour our heritage in St Andrews, and there's a plaque up commemorating Tom's birthplace. As he got older, he would totter down to the links themselves, and this is a map not with the house properties on it, but it's important. Here's the links. Up here, Sawilken Bridge, the Union Parlour would be here in the R&A, and this is the corner of the links, the proposal at that time to build houses. And if we look at it more closely, remarkably, it has here saying the old golf hole. And in Tom's youth, they would just totter down to the corner where Ochterlony's is today, and that was where the golf links started. Bear in mind, as I get further into this, that this is where Tom got his house and his shop, just there. We'll come to that later. And Alan Robertson had this house and his retail there. Tom became an apprentice to Alan Robertson, age 14. So this more detailed map of the town shows, remind you where his house was, we saw in the earlier pictures. And he's now apprenticed, he's working in Alan Robertson's house, as we saw, just where Ochterlony's is today. And Alan is developing a trade really at the bottom of his garden. He owned the whole house, but he gets the trade going at the bottom of his garden to serve the golfers on the links. That was the feathery era, his apprenticeship. It's difficult to get the right word for it, and Peter Lewis and I have struggled over the years trying to get an evocative phrase for the era before the gutta percha ball comes in. A golden era, maybe not quite right. A heroic era, not quite right. So let's just call it the feathery era up until 1848. It was an expensive game because the feathery only lasted maybe 1 round. It was, if it got damp, it could be damaged. Okay. Short-lived, damaged by irons and in the damp as well. The feathery was respected, and they played with wooden clubs only until the arrival. If they were in trouble in the feathery era, they had a single trouble club, as you can see, a very heavy iron to hack the feathery out or give up in match play. There was no need to keep a score, just keep going. The players at that time in the feathery era here were well off, small group of well-off players. They had to be because of the cost of the equipment. They were known to each other. They were often interrelated by marriage and family ties. The feathery era, they played match play. Club foursomes were favoured rather than stroke play. And they often had personal caddies. There were some well-known linkages, favourites at the time. The old course, and that's the wrong phrase to use in the feathery era because there was only the one course, of course. But the course was a difficult, narrow, single track between whins, and the older players later recalled with great nostalgia how to play in this track between the whins. This group even had their own poet, George Fullerton Carnegie, poems from that time speaking warmly of his friends, their little strengths and weaknesses of this group of the heroic era. The gutta revolution was quite rapid and decisive in 1848. Old Tom was working with Robertson as a ball maker for 14 years, and that is hard work, making feathery balls, hard physical work, and he did it for 14 years. But both were now famed as golfers, and we can't, unfortunately, go into too much about that tonight. We're emphasizing this club making and greenkeeping. And the gutta ball arrived in 1848, and it was very quickly accepted, probably within a couple of years. To change over from making featheries to making guttas must have been a relief to Alan and Tom. And gutta was supplied to them in a cylinder like that, and they cut off an appropriate amount for a ball, put it in warm water, not boiling, warm water, and then that went into a mold, and out came the gutta percha ball. And that was, now Alan and Old Tom fell out about the matter. Old Tom and Alan were passing in the narrow course pass, and the word went to Alan that Old Tom was playing with a gutta, and they fell out. Only in professional terms, only in the club making business, because they then went on to the many famous victories at golf together, but went their separate ways. And Old Tom was soon producing gutties, as you can see. That's difficult to see, but that is a Tom Morris gutta ball. And Alan was, well, he had to, he followed on slowly. And interestingly, he realized that you could use the iron clubs now with impunity. Before the iron damaged the featheries, but with the gutties you could hit them with iron clubs, and indeed the more they got not damaged, the more they got dented, the better they flew. So Alan tumbled to the fact that you could have a game with the irons. And this is from Alan's obituary, saying that Alan introduced the deadly use of the cleek, i.e. the iron clubs, in playing up to the hole in the short game. Previous to about 1848, i.e. the Gutta Revolution, short wooden clubs, the baffing or short spoon, were used for this important stroke, both difficult and frequently inaccurate. But Allen employed the cleek. He started using the irons to jerk up his ball. They called that jerking to begin with the gutta. However badly it might lie, it was all the same. And the killing game, and this is interesting, was destructive to a certain extent to the green, because the irons were beginning to take divots. And he then says in the obituary, the game is now all but universal. The aerial game, pitching up to the green with the gutta. There's a picture from the 1850s, just after the gutta comes in, and we can't dwell on it. Unfortunately, Alan and Old Tom are both in it, and they're playing with some gentlemen here in a foursome of some sort, and look how they're playing the old course, as it were, the backwards route. They've started at the clubhouse. They're coming past the Swoken Bridge, and they're heading for the 17th, present 17th green, quite clearly, playing the backward route that we'll talk about shortly. If we look more closely at that gentleman there, he's playing with a club. It's not a hickory shaft. Hickory was just about to come in. That's an ash shaft, but it's not a wooden head. That is a metal head club. And he is playing a short shot to the 17th green in the new Alan Robertson game. Old Tom is recruited to Prestwick, 1851. He's engaged to lay out the course, make equipment, play with the members. And in 1860, Old Tom with Fairley and Lord Eglinton plan and set up the first Open Championship. Tom disappointingly didn't win it the first year, but he did in 61, 62, 64, and 67. And at Prestwick, his family is born, and young Tommy is beginning to show precocious talent at the game. Old Tom is recalled to St Andrews 1864. There'd been a series of earlier keepers of the green, notably in the Robertson family, including Alan, but from the previous 10 years or so, they had joint keepers, Wattie Alexander and Alec Herd. The RNA now announced that they sought a custodian of the green, as it were, a custodian. They kept changing the name, maybe 3 or 4 different names, but this was a custodian at a salary considerably larger than hitherto given. There's something about the terminology there. You get the feeling the RNA are just huffy. They're not pleased about something. Could it be that Wattie, Alec had not given good service? That is unlikely. What is their concern, not with the previous keeper. They were unhappy that the feathery era had gone. This committee and the gentlemen that were making this new appointment vividly remember the good old days of the feathery, and they were full of nostalgia for that. That obituary of Alan has a little phrase about what had happened and why the RNA traditional feathery players might be unhappy. They say that by now the St Andrews links are crowded with careless multitudes, luxuriating in the pastime, cheapened to them by the discovery of gutta percha. And the game is popularized at the expense of its stately traditions. That might be a wee bit exaggerated, but this is the mindset of the RNA. They're unhappy, but they have to do something, and one is to get a better greenkeeper. The difficulties were of the golfers then was added to by the arrival of the railway in 1852, and heavens above, people from Dundee were coming to play to play golf in large numbers. Worse still, the provost was marketing St Andrews as a holiday resort for the middle classes. And of course, I have to remind you that there was free play on the course and there were no starting times. So, adding to that, the destructive iron play, Alan's jerking up game, meant more divots. So, the solution from the R&A point of view, more care, and that the single track course, which we'll come to, needed conversion to 18 conventional holes. It would take about 12 years of hard work. So this is old Tom, back at St Andrews, and his contract is £50 a year. He's allowed one man for 2 days, that's Honeyman that we know about, and he was given £20 a week. Sorry, that's for a year actually, it's £20 a year for casual labour. And what he did was he employed the caddies that had worked during the summer. He would take any favourite caddies and give them winter work over the winter. And he had a barrow, spade and a shovel. And the general remit from the R&A was to make the holes, dig the holes, look after the flags, and mend the turf, notably the many divots that they now grumbled about. But he had extras added on to it, which aren't stated very obviously. He may well have had been encouraged to try and control the so-called careless multitudes that were coming and playing at random. But more seriously, he had supervision of the caddies. And that's quite a heavy duty, because you can see over on the other side here that I've ringed it, that the members of the R&A had to engage caddies through the keeper of the green, through him. So he had to keep that organised. And further up, if there was any question of disciplining, the complaints about the caddies had to be made through old Tom. So that was quite a serious matter put on his shoulders. Did he have extra income? Well, going back to the £50 a year, if you convert that to contemporary money using even the most generous liberal conversion, that is not a lot of money. 15,000, maybe 20,000 equivalent today. So they clearly saw it as a part-time day job for him, because they knew that he was going to get extra income. And the extra income came from personal play with the members. When he played with a member, he would be rewarded. The member would pay for the caddy as well. And of course, he was playing in the famous matches, which sadly we can't go into tonight, but he was winning money in the famous challenge matches. So the R&A knew that he had other money, other income. So the £50 a year was not, although it was his day job, it wasn't seen as a completely overtaking all his day. He had his shop, and he sold obviously gutta balls. He sold clubs, and he repaired clubs. And the shop, as you know, was over at the 18th. But remember, he had bought the whole house right through to the main road. The family house lived up at the main road. This was a development really at the bottom of his garden. And as I say, he had bought the whole property. And you get the feeling at this time that the shop was the first port of call for any golfers, not only the members, but visitors coming in from anywhere. They would this is the place to go for balls, clubs, fixing caddies, and general gossip. And Tom was becoming also expert, or he was an expert on the rules, and many visitors were curious about the rules. So now let's get on to his day job that he's tasked with, dealing with the links, and let's do a wee bit of geology first of all, to where the links came from. If you can imagine, that's the West Sands here, or any coastal region. There's sand on the beach. Sand is pushed inwards by the wind. The dunes appear, and then over the dunes is this natural area for playing golf, the slack over the dunes. Where did the sand come from? Well, it came after the Ice Age, when the land lifted up, the sand, subsea sand was liberated. But where did the sand come from originally? And geologically, we go right back to the Ice Age and the rivers and streams from the mountains bringing down, during a spate, sometimes seen, bringing down quartz and other material to the sea. The beach sand is then blown up to the dunes, and this is a day down at Ely, right up at the top of the beach there. You can see sand on its way up, being blown up all the time, up the little alleyway at Ely towards the golf course. And as well as that, every now and again there is an inundation of sand from the storm from the beach. And this was Storm Deirdre in 2018. We didn't have a big lot of sand, but Montrose Links was completely covered. And instead of that being a disaster, within a month, nature had dealt with it, and the folk at Montrose said that the links had never been better. So I'll return to that theme later. So just a wee bit more geology, that as sand got blown in from the beach inland, very fragile layer of topsoil starts building up from animal droppings and vegetable material of all kinds. And in the links today, out on the links here, if there's any serious works, as here, a pipeline being put into the new course. Here is my wife, who gives apologies for absence tonight. Here's my wife pointing out that below the surface, that very fragile 6 inches or so of topsoil, below that is pure sand. And here she's pointing it out. This is more over at Stratarum, it's more clay there, but there is a very fragile, there's only 2 or 3 inches of topsoil there, and underneath is usually sand or clay. There's been a bit of rain, and very importantly, you can see that the grass roots go right through down into the sand, right down to the water below. And of course, the links always recover from, even when apparently dead in a hot summer, because of the deep roots going right down to the water table. So that was a wee bit of geology about the links are based on sand, and we'll go back to Old Tom's challenges. And the first one is the fairways on the course, not yet known as the old course, but the fairways of his course. The grass was not cut yet. Moors were to come, But the grass was widely admired from far and near. People talked about the luxuriant, the quality of the St Andrews links, and it was clearly playable. Why was that without any greenkeeping and mechanical obstruction in mechanical use? And the answer must be the animals. First of all, rabbits, of course. We know the huge role and presence of rabbits in the old course throughout the century there. But there were sheep as well, highly likely. There were sheep, if only because we know there's a shepherd's cottage, we know there was sheep there. And there are many paintings. This is from the 1860s, one of the RNAs. There's a competition in progress, and you can see in the foreground plenty sheep on the course. But to make matters absolutely certain, the oldest painting that we have of golf and the oldest treasure in the RNA collections is that of the foursome playing as if you're in the Old Course Hotel looking down onto the 17th. And again, we can't linger on that tonight because we're looking for something else. And the something else is indeed sheep. Up here, there's even a suggestion of a shepherd and a dog, but there's definitely in 1750 a flock of sheep out on the links. Sheep have a very nice habit of being partial to daisies. So for any greenkeeping, to get rid of daisies is just a godsend, especially in the springtime. The daisies carpeted the links, so much so that the golfers used red featheries or red guttas, commonly thought to be for play in snow, but they weren't. They were designed to find your ball in the springtime in among daisies. Right. I missed my punchline. Cows. Up here. There couldn't have been cows as well as rabbits and sheep. Looks like there were. Here we go. Because in the bunkers on the 3rd and the 15th from the old maps of the time, lo and behold, just to the north of the principal's nose bunkers, there's Thomas Cow. And Peter Lewis has recently done a good job on it. And here is the evolution of the bunkers on the 3rd hole. And in 1860, if you look down, it confirms that's a bunker called Tom's Cow. 1875, it's changed to Tam's Coo, and then it was filled in. So you have this image of Thomas probably over in the premises, the sheep's premises next door, bringing his cow, and this cow had a favourite resting place in this bunker, and there doubtless were other cows on the course. So the fairways were largely tended by animals. What about the greens? Greens were not particularly well identified as separate at Tom's early days. They called it the fair green, and there were flags put in it early, but the flags couldn't have been there all day, every day during the week. They must have been put out for the competitions. And there's just a suggestion that maybe feathers were put in to mark the hole, or indeed that a forecaddy was sent ahead by a group of players to raise a flag or an arm and indicate to the players where the holes were. Cutting the greens, it seems likely in the early days that they used a flower pot upturned flower pot as a template and cut round the flower pot. And extraordinarily, the dimensions of flower pots I've been researching, there's a 4.5-inch exactly flower pot. So I think that's where the modern hole came from. It's a flower pot dimension from those days. Now, golf was getting a wee bit busier before Old Tom, so they put 2 pins in the single greens, out and in, white out and red in. And hole cutters were appearing. There's a bit of argument who invented the hole cutters. The Leven people say they did it in 1830, and the Musselburgh people contest that, but that's the Musselburgh hole cutter. And almost certainly Tom would get one when he came here. Tom didn't invent the hole cutting, but he certainly had a role in strengthening the holes, the inserts and the linings. And he was troubled with the high hole, the 7th, 11th green. He said in his various interviews, he said it gave it more bother than the rest of them. It was the nearest to the beach, and blown sand was always filling up the hole. So people had to rescue the hole by scooping it out repeatedly. Old Tom planted sea lime grass from Holland, a very expensive purchase, as a shield for the green, but he also added an internal iron support to toughen up the hole. Peter Crabtree's book records Tom saying that when the other holes on the course, other than the high hole, when the other holes got ragged round their edges, I had them done up in the same way with an internal iron support. And that was the beginning of the modern style of the whole tin. Tom was a very modest man. He would not be a person to claim novelty that wasn't his. So when he says that he invented the lining of the hole, I certainly believe him 100%. Mowing of the greens. We don't know when they started using mowers, and or shanks mowers available later, but by 1887, Balfour, looking back, could say that the greens are far more carefully kept instead of being left in their natural state, which he clearly remembers. Now carefully rolled, mowed with a machine, watered in dry weather. And certainly we know that Old Tom had dug a number of wells for his great recreation of the new holes, and he dug a number of wells which went down to the water table, simple pits. Bunkers. This is a picture, an image from the 1850s, again, just the Allen, just before Tom comes. And it's positioned as at the second hole in the old course going out. So it's like progressive bunker today. But you can see at that time the bunkers were ill-tended, ragged edges, and quite an obstacle. Somehow, somewhere about Old Tom's early days, the bunkers were tidied up. And astonishingly, people think that revetting is even just last century innovation, but there is very skillful, confident revetting of a fairway bunker, maybe about the 1880s. So this is started probably in Tom's era, the regularization and tidying up of the bunkers by laying turf slabs on top of each other. The tees. There's a myth that the players of the feathery and gutta era, that the caddies went into the hole and took out a handful of sand for the players to drive the ball. That can't possibly be true. You wouldn't get a morning's play would just destroy the holes, so that couldn't be true. It doesn't seem to have ever been written down what to do, except the Bruntsfield Club rules, 1830s, say that no golfer or caddy to be allowed to dig within 10 yards of the hole. So this is actually a prohibition on taking sand, not only from the hole, which is really absurd, but also from round the hole. The hole had to be preserved. Balfour in 1887 really credits Old Tom with a separate teeing area, saying that a separate teeing ground has been provided at each hole, which preserves the putting greens from being broken by the tee strokes. A wooden box filled with sand for the tee is a novelty, 1887, and an additional refinement. And we see them in the early photographs, the late 1880s. Here is the sandbox on a rough tee, but at last separate from the putting green. But Tom's main work was establishing 9 new separate holes. He'd been appointed, if you remember, 1864, and his main work was to create parallel new 9 holes. That meant new fairways and new greens, which he made by expanding the existing fairways and greens toward the sea. Just to remind you, the ancient single track coming out, this is just about the Old Course Hotel here, and coming back along there, that's where Tom's coup bunker was, and so forth. A single track played out to the turn, backwards as it were, to the turn, and then come back along to the same greens with 2 flags in it. And Tom's great work was to expand out towards the sea, which meant dealing with the winds. I don't think that's artistic license or tinting from the artist. I think that is more than a hint or a truth that there were dense winds on this side, and all the literary descriptions are of dense wind there. So he cuts back the winds and expands all the greens out to a lozenge shape. Winds and bents are cleared, not only, and that one it was a huge work, which wasn't ready until the 1879 Open. And both circuits afterwards could be used. You could play, as we do now, the anti-clockwise route, and then on other occasions do the clockwise route. And that suited a greenkeeper like Old Tom because it spread the damage, spread the wear, particularly the divots. The members weren't happy. There was much nostalgia for the old layout, particularly the winds, the challenge of the winds. Right, top dressing. For dressing the links, Tom favoured beach sand, and that meant the West Sands sand there, and he used it for the top dressing the links, for filling up divots and refreshing the bunker sand. Now, beach sand has nutritional qualities. It is not inert quartz. It was from the mountains, but it's now mixed in with shell and seaweed product, distinctly nutritional. And his use of beach sand it mimicked the natural evolution of the links I've talked about, and the natural refreshment which is going on all the time. And the staff here, like Hannah in the museum, will tell you that if they leave their cars outside in the car park for any length of time, there's a fine patina of sand gathers on the windscreen. Right. By the 1880s and so forth, Old Tom is now a national icon, wonderful player, father of young Tom, sadly deceased, but there are verdicts on Old Tom's contributions to golf in the widest sense. Speaking about the links, Balfour, we've quoted before, said the links are far more carefully kept than they used to be. Tom Morris superintends this with great assiduity, and he has 2 men under him who are constantly employed in keeping the bunkers at the proper size, the revetting, filling up the rabbit scrapes or other holes, i.e. the divots, and in returfing places which have given way. Horace Hutchinson in his writing added great compliment, slightly sly compliment in places, but he talks about Tom's unfailing courtesy, kindliness, tact and perfect temper, which have kept all the various interests that are apt to run counter to each other at St Andrews. I'll repeat that. Interests which are a little apt to run counter to each other at St Andrews, jogging along without friction. They have all done. This is all the stakeholders, all the actors. They have all done, like good little boys, what Old Tom has told them to do over all these years. In the 1880s, Tom is still playing well. He was in the top 10 at the 1884 Open, age 64. But his old lifestyle is changing. There's a caddy master now to look after the caddies, and there's even a starter by 1890. He was developing other interests. He was designing courses, setting them up, traveling distances. He became a vice president of the Professional Golfers Association and supported them. He was an elder in the Church of Scotland. He was even a delegate to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland one of the years. In short, he was a national icon, and he was away a lot, and there was a wee bit of grumbling starting. He was laying out the courses. He had these celebrity appearances, not only in any important matches or events at St Andrews. At home, you can see him really standing proudly in the theatre of the event. But he travelled widely and would show up at professional events, even when he's getting quite senior, as showing solidarity with the new professionals. And a slight thorn in his life was the 1891, a new R&A Greens Committee. There were press criticism of the course that year, and worse still, the English members, the English R&A members were coming back and reporting that their wealthy clubs had scientific greenkeeping. So the question was, would Tom maybe kindly step aside? A consulting greenkeeper role was proposed, which he declined. 1895, a national testimonial was arranged, and some years passed, and the Reverend Hull on the committee was deputed to suggest retirement. He took 2 meetings, but he was successful, and Old Tom in 1903 relinquished his custodian post, and a scientific, quote unquote, greenkeeper appointed. My story doesn't end there because there is a twist to it, so you'll bear with me with the strange persistence of Tom's methods I'll finish with that. And the scientific man appointed was Hugh Hamilton from Dornoch, Portmarnock, at £3 a week. And very pointedly, he was not allowed to have a shop or make clubs or lay out greens elsewhere. In 1907, there were complaints about him, and the Green Committee records a formal warning about alcohol. He managed to keep going for 3 years, but in 1911, he was sacked because there was trouble on the course as well. Hamilton had damaged the greens. In 1911, there had been a drought. Instead of the natural waiting to the brown earth to recover when dead, he had seeded, fed and watered. By 1912, most of the greens had gone, and there was a question of postponing next year's amateur. It was so bad. The course was closed for many months. St Andrews Citizen was brutal. The old course will never be the same, with all the interference with nature, which the methods of the green doctors, the scientific doctors, scientific greenkeepers, i.e. Hamilton, have brought about. Harold Hilton, who would win the tournament, wrote in Golf Monthly, "Grass has returned unevenly," this is on the links, "and of a much coarser texture. The greens are covered with a form of strong herbiage, which certainly does not suggest a seaside course." The explanation was that during the drought, Hamilton had insisted on new grass seed, sowed, fed and watered, and the eventual recovery gave meadow grass greens. And this was undone by the club by sacking him and reverting to the old methods. And they did this by appointing a member, Blackwell, as the keeper. No scientific greenkeepers anymore. One of our boys will take over, one of our men will take over, and he had advice from the suggestion book in the Army of a very interesting nature. I would suggest that the first 3 holes do not and never did need manure, as Hamilton had done. What they need is sand, such as may be obtained from the pit at the heather hole teeing ground, which has distinctly nutritional properties. So there we are, sand was back. So finally, what's in it? What's in beach sand? As I said before, there's quartz, shell, seaweed products. It's not inert like quarry sand. So let's see. So with my wife's help, we did a little experiment. On the left, you see seeds put into quartz. On the right, into compost from garden centre. And in the middle, having gone through various hoops, I may say, and legalities, I was granted a teapot full, a pot full of West sand from the allocation which the trust is allowed. And the answer is, there we go on there. There was surprising growth in pure quartz, so the seeds had a little bit of reserve nutrition to get going. The compost from the garden centre gave luxuriant growth, as Hamilton had with his attempt to rescue the greens. And in between, sand from the West Sands gives a very respectable, better growth than pure quartz. So Old Tom's reverence for beach sand was not misplaced, and I think has lasting implications. Thank you for listening.